Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of things to clarify by way of introduction. You'll hear me struggling through the we terminology, and I've left Hydro Aluminium now, and I've left Hydro, so I'm trying to get over to them. And so you'll find the combination of all kinds of things coming out as I transition over to a consulting company and work on my own. A point that I'd like to make is that I'm not in Hydro. I am not and was not kind of Dr. Death who travels around the world closing plants down and putting large numbers of people out of work. It's just a coincidental thing that Hydro, and I think it's a good thing that Hydro looks upon plant closure, which it doesn't do very often at all, as a method of, as a kind of organisation development. It's just a negative kind, but we still need to do it well. We regard as pretty important. The other thing is the reasons for closure. Primarily, the two primary reasons were strength of the Australian dollar and the low world market price for aluminium, something that we call LME, London Metal Exchange, which sets the world price for aluminium as a commodity. So we had a double whammy of a rising Australian dollar and a sinking raw material, world raw material price. What I'd like to do is just talk to you about two things over the next 40 minutes. One is to give you some key pointers in what we did in terms of the closure process. But I'd like also to spend about half of the time, the second half, on how we manage large-scale organisation change in that organisation. So Hydro, for those of you who don't know it, it's a Norwegian company, 47% owned by the Norwegian state. It has around about 100 plants around the world in over 40 countries and about 22,000 employees. Before I was the HR manager at Hydro Aluminium in Kurri in New South Wales, I spent about 12 years as an internal consultant on organisations. So let's have a look at the closure process. The numbers, big number there is the 550 employees that were affected. In December 2011, we tried to stem the bleeding and we reduced support staff by 50. And then making aluminium is a lot like a baking process, and we had at Kurri 3 pot lines, which is like 3 cake baking processes, and we decided to close one of them, the oldest one, and lay off 150 people in that. Now, we had an aging workforce, so my estimate out of that 150 is at about 142 to 145 were what we call dancers. That means they danced through the gates of the factory with their big fat checks in their hands. And although we tried to get them to do the dancing after they left the gate so we didn't get an injury. So they were delighted to go and quite happy with the fact that aged roughly between 58 and 67, that was a great time for them to retire. That then left a period of time between January and May where we were basically fighting for survival. We had roughly 2 years of either break-even or slight monthly losses. Slight meaning around about $2 million a month, something like that. So it was a serious situation, and that culminated in May in an announcement that we would curtail the whole production at the plant. And actually today there are about 12 people. The plant is in a mothballed state. Personally, I think the chances of that aluminium ever being made in Kurri again is extremely small. But we do have a very small number of people there. So we had the job as an HR team of finding jobs for 338 people. We believed that it was our responsibility to, as being part of a small community, the largest employer in that community, Obviously, we felt that we had a responsibility to not find people new jobs, but to help them get into a job market in the optimal possible condition for them. Okay? So that meant interview skills training, that meant resumes completely done, that meant some interview role plays so that they were polished and ready to go into the job market. And we could open up some doors of opportunity with some local firms, particularly those who wanted larger number, let's say more than 5 or 10 employees fairly quickly. And then, of course, we could bring those companies in to talk to the workforce. A little bit more on that later. This is what the HR team came up with in terms of the closure process. We tend to think of our work in terms of business processes, and this was the sketch that we developed for the closure. Underneath each one of these, so what we would do is that we would have this on a computer screen, and then if you double-clicked on, let's choose number 9 here, conduct the phased exit of employees. I mean, that particular step will be critical for a company called Ford Motor Company in Australia. Yeah, that's a 3-year notice period that's given. The biggest challenge that Ford are going to have is to retain their skilled workforce as they leave the organization, as they leave the company. So you would double-click on that, and then underneath that, there would be okay, who is going to do what, by when? And each one of those process steps had a template underneath it like this. And obviously, these are the initials of the HR team. You can see how I had a great team who did most of the work, and my initials are there just for a little bit of interviewing the outplacement provider. But I did do some stuff a little bit later on in the process. So underneath each one of those points here, we would have a template like that that we then followed up as a team every week. The thing that I'd like to talk to you about is could you just give me a show of hands if you've ever heard of a branch of psychology called appreciative inquiry? Okay, 1 or 2 or 3, 4. Okay, not many people. Great, okay. Right, we'll come to that in a second. This gentleman, and this is not an attack on Richard Downey or on the AWU at all, but this is our view, our perception of events. I'll just read this one part to you. Mr. Downey also warned that the fallout from the hydro closure would not stop when employees had redundancy payments in the bank. He said it will continue for months, even years. There will be depression, relationship separations, divorces, household problems, even suicide. People just don't understand the ramifications of situations such as this, Mr. Downey said. For a lot of these workers, this has been their life for more than 30 years. They don't know anything different. That was published in the Newcastle Herald, the largest newspaper in the area. From a company perspective, we think it's very irresponsible to print something like that, and even more irresponsible to say something like that. Anybody who knows the basics of psychology will know that in a community, you will have some people in a community of, say, 350 people who are going to be put out of work. You will have a number of people who are, for a period of time, a little bit on the edge. They have more turbulence in their life than the majority. And the last thing that we need is people saying to them, well, suicide's an option. If anything, though, this statement served to galvanize the team that worked for me and with me. And we decided to set about making sure that we would exit 350 people from our organization without any of these things happening, if we had anything to do with it. So, appreciative inquiry. It's the cooperative search for the best in people, the best in organizations and the world around them. It involves the discovery of what gives life to a living system. The inquiry is mobilized through the crafting of an unconditional positive question. For us, that unconditional positive question was, we are putting 350 people out of work. What is the best that we can do for them? So that they walk through that gate for the last time, saying to each other and to themselves, I didn't like the decision, but I couldn't have been treated better by any company that I can think of. I never imagined I would be treated as well as this. So that was the question, our unconditional positive question as an HR team was, what do we need to do to make that circumstance happen and to get those people leaving with that? And to not focus upon the relationship separations and the divorces and the household problems and the like, but to focus upon what the best of that living system has produced over the years. So we said what needs to be done in order to give people a superior exit experience so that in the face of adversity, they leave commenting on how well they've been treated, that they're saying better than that they could have ever experienced. Just one of I think this just links a little bit to some of the presentations that have happened earlier today. One of the key foundations, the key principles of appreciative inquiry is, as an example, we would not do an inquiry into low morale in an organization if that's what an employee engagement survey showed. To take an appreciative approach would be to say, let's see what gives life to that living system. So let's get people to imagine the best day that they have had in the last 6 months or a year or so, and get them to talk about and let us document what were the circumstances and the characteristics that brought their joy and their happiness and their engagement into that workplace. And then let's try to reproduce those circumstances on a more consistent basis. Perhaps an even simpler approach is one that I heard on the radio about a year ago now, when it was one of these radio programs, FM programs, where they have a couple of people presenting the program, normally a man and a woman in the morning, and they decided that they wanted people to call in. This was a Monday morning. They wanted people to call in and tell them what it was that really gets them angry, particularly over the weekend. What is it that, forgive my language, but what is it that really pees you off at the weekend? And of course they had people calling in with, I was standing in Myers and she dealt with me in a very unacceptable way and that gets me really annoyed, and I was standing in a pub and waiting to be served and somebody jumped in, that gets me annoyed. And they had these stories really coming through. Now what Ron Fry and David Cooper-Ryder, the originators of appreciative inquiry, would say is, think about how much negative impact that radio broadcast had on the workplace. Because all of those people listening, almost all of them, were traveling to work. And what those broadcasters had done is they had recreated the circumstances in their mind of when they are annoyed and angry and irritated, and they walk into the workplace like that. What the radio program didn't do, maybe to balance things out, was the next day to say, please would you call us and tell us what brings joy and love and friendship into your life over the weekend, and bring your positive stories. We have this tendency as human beings to err to the negative when we're faced with choices. So AI says, let's keep that in mind. I could drone on for ages about AI, and I know that I'll run out of time. But just one thing, some people have mentioned that they've got teenagers, and earlier Dr. Bauer mentioned that there was a slide with a teenager who grunted. The best way, if you have teenage children, to stop children grunting when you say to them, how was your day at school? And you get the grunt back. The best way to stop that is to ask an appreciative question. And try this one. What was the best thing that happened to you today at school? What was the best thing that happened? Now, don't use it every evening because they get really bored with it. But just occasionally, just try that once. What was the best thing that happened to you today? And see what the response is. Well, once they've gotten over the shock. Okay, we did a jobs market day. We needed to bring together 350 unemployed people. As it turned out, there were another 300 people from local towns and villages who said, please can we come along as well? And we didn't feel that we had the right to say no to those people. And again, I stress to you, we got on very well on site with the AWU. But I've got to say that the AWU said, no, we don't want other people coming. We want these jobs ourselves. And we had to say no. We don't have the right to turn people away. We've got more jobs on offer at this, potentially on offer at this market day than we have people. And this is what we managed to do. We put on an enormous event. We got professional event management people in to help us. We split the cost with the federal government. I think it was not big money. I think that this was the biggest return on investment that the federal government has had maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. But we split it 50-50 with them, and we got 70 exhibitors who brought 6,500 genuine vacancies. We hit them very hard with that. They must be genuine vacancies when we bring these two groups together. And in retrospect, you'll see on one of our lessons learned, I don't think that everyone really fully listened to that. And I'll explain that. I'll touch on that a little bit later. You can see here Mr. Fitzgibbon consulting his, he was actually checking the NRL scores while I was, these are my trousers there, while I was doing my speech. But to be fair to Mr. Fitzgibbon, he made a fantastic speech. I've got to say, the 3 politicians who were photographed there, they dropped all party politics for their speeches. They kept their speeches short, they did not snipe at each other, and they behaved perfectly well. And I felt that when Joel said, even in the direst of circumstances, Hydro is a great company to work for, then I have to say I felt, wow, we're achieving something a bit special here. Yeah. So you can see the kind of, it was, if you take the stalls that are outside and multiply it by about 10 to 15, then that's the kind of event that we put on. Timing is really critical with a jobs market day. I heard on the news the other day that Ford are going to do their jobs market day in the next week or 10 days or something like that. That is way too early. They need to find out who's leaving when, and they need to work on then they need to sit down with their unions and say, when is the optimal time to hold a jobs market day? Because you've got to get people polished and ready to enter the workforce. Okay? Just a very quick story. I've had a lovely lady working for me called Cheryl. She was like the mother of our workforce. Mid to late 50s, and has been at the plant for 25 years and was the return to work coordinator. A couple of guys came into her office and she said, she sorted them out, and then she said, and you are coming to the jobs market day, aren't you? And they said, yeah, we're on dog watch, which is the 12-hour night shift, the night before. So we will leave at 7 in the morning, and then we will hang around for a couple of hours in the crib room, and then we'll be ready for 9 o'clock. Cheryl said, no, you won't. You are not walking straight off a 12-hour shift into that jobs market day. This is what you're going to do. You're going to go home. You're going to sleep for a few hours. You're going to get up and shave. You're going to wash yourselves, and you're going to dress properly. And then you're going to come into this market day and present yourself to potential employers as somebody who's employable. and they meekly and humbly turned around and walked back to their jobs. And I knew, I'm in an office next door to Cheryl, so I knew that those two guys would go right back to the shift team and tell them what Cheryl told them to do, and that the whole shift team would, and very quickly, people would get the message. So things like that are they emerged, but they're important. The reason it's 323 and not 350 is take off the 12 who still had jobs for the mothball crew and several apprentices who we found homes for very, very quickly. Great community response to take our apprentices. Within 48 hours of the announcement of the closure, we had companies calling us saying, we'll take your apprentices, or a few of them. So we had a goal of getting 323 people into jobs, and that was their responsibility. But as at the 31st of December, we reached 225. I think if it had not been for a slump in the resources sector, I think we would have been up to 315, something like that. But 6 weeks after our jobs market day was June the 15th. 6 weeks after that, last year, we had the slump in the resources sector. And I think a lot of companies who came to the jobs market day couldn't then translate their genuine vacancies into genuine vacancies. They reduced. The point of the cowbell is that we had that on the wall, and every time a person who was still employed got a new job, they had to come in and tell the HR department, and then they had to go down and take the cowbell off the wall and ring the cowbell. And all of the people in our HR office, which is not much, but we also had some other colleagues, they would come out and they would stand in their doorways and they would applaud. And, you know, there is a psychological thing here where a lot of the guys from the shop floor, they said they didn't like to do that. But, you know, when you are 55 years old and you've been employed in the same job for the last 25 years, and you have found yourself a new job that you are going to move seamlessly into when you finish, you feel quite good and quite proud about that. And we wanted to make sure that there's a recognition of that somehow. And that's how we did it. Okay, I'll let you have a quick read of these two slides because I've covered most of them in the presentation. FCR is a Sydney-based firm that really helped us with stakeholder analysis. When we laid off the 150, they made sure that we arranged for, that was myself and the chairman of the board of the company, to go and see the major politicians both in Sydney and in the Newcastle area to brief them. First time I've ever done anything like that, and I learned a lot. Well, the biggest thing I learned was that politicians will give you time if you go to explain to them what your strategy is and why it is the way it is. If you leave information with them, and you are really preparing them for an announcement that could be made, as we had in January, an announcement that could be made. But they are basically armed. They're not just reading in the press and then having to face questions from their constituents. So I'd say that they thoroughly appreciated that. I know that some people are kind of scribbling these down and writing these down, but that we are sharing these slides. So you can you can get me to mail them to you, or you can get the event organizers here to mail them to you. But you do get access to that. Real quick point about the Smeltdown book. In 2002, with the closure of a plant in the UK in Leeds, we made a book called Meltdown. If you're interested in the notion of stories and myths and legends in organizations, the there are 2 copies of that book still available for very little money on amazon.co.uk. It's called Meltdown, Images and Words from a Yorkshire Foundry. It made aluminium engine castings, and 650 people were put out of work there. But again, like in automotive, it was that they had an 18-month period. What we asked them to do was to bring the myths and the stories and legends that had built up in that plant since the Second World War, and to write them down, and we would capture them in a book. And also, and we did this in Curry as well, we photographed every one of our employees with their workmates in their teams, often next to the product, the finished product that we had made. And those went into the book as well. And there are some fantastic stories that have been passed from generation to generation in through the years in the organisation. We publicise the positive and the heartwarming stories. Again, it's an appreciative approach. A guy called Brad Knight finished working, 15 years experience on the shop floor in a fairly dirty aluminium smelter. Today, Brad Knight works with underprivileged youths who have dropped through the system and need to get them back on track and put into jobs, and he helps them find jobs. He works for a company called Castle in the Maitland area. Brad is doing the best work that he's ever done in his life, and said, of course, if that plant had still been open, he would still be pushing a broom and cleaning up pots and making aluminium, and he would have done that for the rest of his life. But he's now doing really fantastic work on a community level. Things we could have done better. I'll whiz through these real quick because I just want to talk about organisation change. Look at really it was about managing expectations better. For the jobs market day, some people still did think that they were going to the jobs market day and someone was going to say, here's your new job, show up a week on Monday, have a week off between this job and that one, and then you start on the same pay with that employer. They thought that's what they would get from the jobs market day. Not many, but we should have worked harder on that. We should have hammered employers on the real jobs available now. And I was disappointed personally with the AWU seniority in terms of its participation and its presence. And again, this is not an attack on the people, but the head of the AWU did not come to our plant, not once. 350, most of them, no, that would be, he lost between 350 and 400 members of the AWU who have been paying $9 a week for a long, long time to his organisation. And he could have come to that plant and talked to those people, but chose not to. And I was disappointed in that. I should have got on the telephone to him and said, I think you need to come down and talk to people. Okay, how do we manage change in hydro and me outside of hydro? This is a change methodology that I developed with 2 colleagues in hydro in 1998. And we developed it and tested it, and senior managers liked it. They liked to work with it. Again, it's this is a database that we have. So if you double-click on this, or you double-click on stakeholder management there, or on change leadership, if you double-click on these icons, then you will open up a set of facilitation tools that help you build, let's say, a business case. They build stakeholder management. So it's a set of tools that a skilled facilitator will lead a change team and a management team together, and is a perfect foundation Further workshops are possible, but it's especially important to have this change workshop early in a major change project. Not least because it serves to align the people who are working on the project with the people who are managing the business. The way we look at change in hydro is this one slide. And I know that the green doesn't come out very well at the back, so I'll just read the key bits. But again, you do get the slides. The source of resistance to change, that's human feelings. People who resist change are not bad, evil, wicked people. They're good people. The reason they resist change is because they care. They care about their jobs, and they're not going to let you mess with them. So we look upon resistance as a really good and authentic and organic thing. We don't look upon it as a bad, evil thing. And so what we try to do is, because it's very much about the way people feel and their emotions, we try to work on anticipating the feelings and responses when change is introduced into an organization. Now, when we just look at these next few slides, please broaden your thinking away from closing a business and maybe introducing a new computer system, doing major restructuring change, major organization change, let's say in redesign. It supports growth projects. So it's any kind of change that takes place in an organization. So we're saying managing change is actually a contradiction in terms. We don't manage, to be successful, we don't manage change, we should manage emotions. At the end of the closure period, we had 0 LTIs, best safety performance ever, record levels of production and quality, 0 scrap at the end of production, no disputes, no industrial action, and the highest levels of cooperation ever seen in our organization after 43 years. Immense pride in cleaning and preparing the plant for mothballing. When I made this presentation the first time in Newcastle, somebody came to me afterwards and said, this was a completely different approach to the way that my company, he said, has dealt with this. We believe that we have to get people off the site immediately and quickly because they will sabotage a place and they will damage and they will behave badly. And we say, no, they won't. They won't do that. People are incredibly proud of their workplace and the organization that they're going to leave behind. We find that if we give them as much notice period as possible, and research suggests if it's not a shocking change out of the blue, okay, just as Ford wasn't. If you listen to those interviews with the workers, this was not a big surprise. They're disappointed and sad and angry and upset, but it's not a big surprise. They know that they had a good idea about what was coming to them. Yeah, I gave you the numbers. 0 suicides, 0 family breakups, 0 depression, and just a very few instances of counselling which lasted for 6 weeks, 6 one-week sessions, and that happened for 4 people. Yeah, this is what the senior delegate in the carbon plant said. When we just look at these, just think about emotions and what they're talking about. I can honestly say I don't hold any ill feeling towards the company. Common sense tells you can't keep running a business at losing money and keep shareholders happy at the same time. I take my hat off to the HR team for the way they handled this tough situation and kept the doors to the department open. I've been in my new job now for 2 months and I'm really struggling with the change. It's just not the hydro way, the way that I know. I have no choice but to deal with it and get on with my working life. And then Warren, senior delegate in the biggest part of the plant, I was angry and disappointed at the news of the closure and found it hard to front up for work. Hydro provided more support than most companies would and did a good job of that. We didn't have enough time together to grieve as a family over the loss. People were leaving, and sometimes we miss saying goodbye. It just happened so quick. And I think that we could have had a counsellor available more often. Do we have time for 2 minutes?
Yes, but no questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we could drop the questions, because we're going to have this cocktail thing, aren't we?
Yeah.
And if you've got questions for me, I'm more than happy to take them afterwards, especially if you bring a cocktail to me. I'd really like you to just talk to the person next to you and just form a couple of a small group, if you wouldn't mind just doing a little piece of work now, okay? And it's to answer this question. Basically, I think the more I do this, it's more or less the same question. Why is it, after a closure announcement, management and shop floor workers stop fighting and start to cooperate like they've never cooperated before? And how do we get them to that position before the worst thing happens? So, just talk with the people that are sitting nearby. A quick brainstorm to answer that question. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, there is something about a class war thing of protecting what we've got, but then when it's over, there's nothing to protect anymore. So, and we start behaving like. Now, by the way, I don't have the answer to this, but I think it's really interesting to try to move towards a situation where we don't have to wait for things like this to happen. We had so many employees saying to us, you close this plant, that'll never happen, never in a million years. And wow, what a shock those people had when they got that. Okay, other points. What else did you come up with? Had a really good
Communication strategy.
yeah. Yep. Yeah. 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 I think that's a really good point. We shared true and correct financial information every month with 30 union delegates and gave the literature to them and asked them not to take it to the press because it's private company results. And again, nobody took that kind of stuff to the press. So you're right, a really good communication campaign is important. Yes. Yeah, there was a lady here.
The goal is very clear. You know, there's one goal and people need to sort of line up to the
Yeah.
clarity of purpose, and I think that's often what's missing in organisational life.
Yeah.
People don't know what the goal is.
Yes. Yeah. And where their daily work contributes towards that goal. Yeah. Yeah. That also reminds me of one other thing that we majored on over and over again here, and it touches upon the previous presentation that you had, and that was to say to people, now if we are one of the industrial smelters around the world that has never had a fatality in 43 years. And we said to these men, mainly men, if we're going to have a fatality, it will be now. Because minds will be on, how am I going to pay the mortgage, and how am I going to pay for the boat, and all of this kind of thing, and how am I going to get another job, and this is where your concentration will lapse. And it's amazing to see how, again, workers and managers again stop arguing over the minutiae of safety and actually start doing it when something as serious as that is put to them. Yeah. Yeah. Any other points? One at the back there and then this one.
I'm not really making a new point, I'm just repeating. We had someone's raised communication.
Yeah.
Someone beginning in yourself raised this human nature. When the contest is over, when the game's finished, we shake hands and like we just saw Tony Abbott a couple of nights ago praising Mark Ferguson.
Yes.
Because he's
Yeah, it was excellent. Yeah.
I hadn't heard him say anything nice about him.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, communication. The question then is, how do you get that genuine level of communication before the disaster?
Yeah, yeah. We did say to the workforce before the closure announcement, about 6 months before, please can we amend the enterprise agreement, and will you go without your 4% pay rise for 1 year? It will take $2 million off the wage bill, or it won't add $2 million to the wage bill. And importantly, it will be a very clear signal to the owners of the company in Norway that our workforce is prepared to go the extra mile as well, and realize that we've all got to get behind this. What do you think the answer was? Yeah. No, it was no. 75% said, give me the money.
So I'm saying communication breakdown. You must be talking to the employees through the union.
That's right, yeah.